Okay, latest on, of course, AI. Today, I'm only going to talk about hallucinations. For those that don't know, hallucinations are when the large language model, LLM, like ChatGPT, makes stuff up. It lies, it makes stuff up, whatever you want to call it, gives you information which is not factual. So I'm going to talk about why it happens, why it continues to happen, and why it may linger for a little while. It's probably the biggest problem right now with generative AI, with like ChatGPT, is this hallucination. There's a tendency when a new technology comes out for everyone to think that it's going to solve all previous problems. So when you get something that's as fantastic at giving responses like ChatGPT, everyone just thinks, well, it does most things perfectly. It should do everything perfectly. So when it makes things up, comes as a bit of a shock, and then people start saying the whole thing doesn't work. It's got no value, etc. The important thing about these LLMs is it's a reasoning engine and not a fact engine. So the revolution here is that it speaks perfect English, substitute different language for English. It speaks our language, it understands our language perfectly, but it does get the facts mixed up, which I'll explain now. So I've done videos in the past about how these were trained, how these models were created. It's actually really simple and really complicated at the same time. It's read everything. Some people say 20 trillion words. It's read most of the internet, and it's read most books. And one word at a time, it compares the positions of words to each other, and it works out what the next best word is in a sentence because it's read 20 trillion words. So it's an auto predictor of the next word or the next token, which is like a piece of a word. Just think of words. It's much easier. So that's the problem. It's the best guess of the next word using probability. So when you ask it a question, it's going to come one word at a time, always using the most likely best next word. When it's got excellent options, it's fantastic. It's going to give you essays of fantastic facts and it'll all be perfect. When it doesn't have good options, it will still give you lots and lots of text, and it won't tell you it had bad options and those options were not good, but it gave it the best one that it had. So it's going to give you a hallucination. And the hallucinations happen where there isn't a good source of data in the first place. Example I always give is you ask it for 100 best things to do in San Francisco, it'll be fantastic. Ask it for 100 things to do in Sunderland, UK, where there were only 3 good things to do, and that's a stretch. It's going to still give you 100, but it made 97 of them up. But it still speaks with confidence. It's a really good liar, which is the problem. When people read this stuff, they think, oh, it sounds really good, and then they find out they just made it up. That's a bit shocking. Sorry for folks from Sunderland, but you get my point. So that's why it continues to do this, because it's just a probability of the next word. So when they first train this stuff, it reads 20 trillion words. It's got good data sources and bad data sources. An example of the best data source it's got for source of truth is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is generally really good information. It passes over Wikipedia 3 or 4 times. This other website, it's kind of okay, but not great. It passes over it twice. But once it's passed through it and read all those words and compared all those words, it just gets dumped into one big vector database, which is numbers. It converts tokens to numbers and all it ends up doing, it doesn't know where it's read it. So when people say, why doesn't it give sources? Because it doesn't know sources. It doesn't know where it read this and where it read that. It just knows the next word. So it's good at what it's trained on, and it's terrible where it's had no training. Once they've trained this thing with 20 trillion words, is when the work really starts. So now you've got a raw LLM. Raw LLMs are not good for human consumption. It's got all the information, but it will give you really bad answers to certain things. If you ask it how to make a nuclear weapon, it'll just give you the ingredients, tell you the methods, this is how you do it, etc. We don't want that. It'll give you things about, ask it for 10 great things about Hitler. It'll just give you a list and say he was fantastic, because it's trying to come up with the best options. And we don't want that. We don't want racism. There's lots of things we don't want. So humans come in and humans help train this model. So there's reinforcement learning with human feedback RLHF, which you'll hear all the time, that's where humans have sat in front of ChatGPT and they've given it a prompt, and ChatGPT's come back with different options, and the humans decided that one is better than that one, and it learns from these responses. And with thousands of humans and thousands of responses and some machine learning on top, it's trained to give the best response that we as humans want. And that took a lot of time. It's probably the reason why ChatGPT is still better than the others. It creates these guardrails, so it doesn't go off on a wobbly too much, even though sometimes it does. And it generally gives us great answers, and it doesn't give us inappropriate or bad answers, because people all try and break this stuff. It does introduce bias, which is a whole different subject entirely, because humans have decided what a good answer is versus not a good answer. So that's the reason we've got to this place. So through this fine tuning, which is what that is, you get rid of some bad information. And GPT continues to fine tune. The latest version of GPT is GPT-4. That wasn't a retraining. They didn't go back and reread 20 trillion words. They finished that, I think, 18 months ago now. The rest has been fine-tuning on top. So it's not a question of just reading more and more and more. It hasn't trained since September 21. They're just fine-tuning it to give us better answers based on what it already knows. So that's where we are today. There's another misconception that people talk about is Google's going to win this because Google's got access to the most data. It doesn't need more data right now. It's got access to enough data to speak perfect English. What they're saying is giving it more and more of the same quality of data isn't going to make it any better. So having it read Twitter every day isn't going to make it any more intelligent or less able to hallucinate. It's just going to give it more junk human comment data, and it'll probably go backwards. So it's not a question of having access to more data is going to build a better LLM. On a side note here, the other topic that comes up is it going to train on its own output? It's called synthetic data. So obviously ChatGPT could make an unlimited amount of data. You just tell it to go and write 20 trillion more words, and it can. And can it train on that data? Interestingly enough, the chief scientist at OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, says it can. This is a bit difficult to understand because it's obviously produced it, so how can it train on the information that it's produced? But that is debated. Some people say it's nonsense, but some very smart people say it actually works and it actually does get more intelligent. Brings in all kinds of interesting things like, is it actually producing new lines of thought? Because if it's improving on reading its own data, that would suggest that it's actually creating new lines of thought that humans haven't come up with, which is probably true, but that's probably for another time as well. So the LLMs themselves are going to fine-tune these hallucinations out slowly but surely, but they're not going to get all the way. And when you listen to the experts, they don't speak with confidence about getting all the way out of this, getting rid of hallucinations. The other place we can get rid of them is on the user side. Not users really, but these third parties. So for example, Expedia and Booking are building chatbots on these LLMs. I think they're both using GPT-4 or ChatGPT. So they use their own data. So Expedia uses its hotel data and flight data, and it uses the language part of the language model because that knows how to understand and speak English. But it's using the Expedia hotel information, which is a really good way to get rid of hallucinations, but it's still tricky because there's crossover. Does it use this hotel data here, but then when it talks about the destination, it can't find it here, so it uses the large language model, and it's open to potential hallucinations still, which generally is going to be okay, but sometimes someone's going to miss their flight based on a chatbot, and it's going to be big news, and it's Expedia's fault, and nobody cares if Expedia says, oh, well, it was the LLM that made a mistake. No, it was Expedia's fault. Big problem in travel, much bigger problem in someone like medicine, but it is quite a difficult thing to solve. Another way you can solve it is by going back and forth with the LLM. Ask it a question, it gives you a response, and then ask it to check its answer. And actually, if you ask it again, funnily enough, it can come back and say, actually, yeah, that wasn't true, my previous response. It's kind of like a human. If you ask it to kind of check again and think about it again, sometimes we'll catch our own mistakes. But the reason being, it doesn't make the same mistake twice usually. So when it asks itself again, it's come back with a different result. So you can go back and forth and ask it to check its work. You can also use a different LLM. So you can ask ChatGPT a question, get the response back, send that response to, say, Google's Bard, a different LLM, and have that respond back. And by triangulating them together, you'll usually come up with the fact. Reason being, they don't make the same mistake. They don't make the same errors on the same information. So you'll be able to find out. Same way these things were trained in the first place. You're basically getting the average of all the information out there, knowing that if someone's made a mistake, it won't come up again, most likely. So you can triangulate using different LLMs. Third way you can do it is use third-party information. Best example of that is going to be Google Maps. So the Google Places API is the information in Google Maps. As an example, you're creating an itinerary to visit California. You've got 20 places to visit. You want to make sure those are real places because the LLM gave you those places. So you ask it for a place name and you ask it for some geo, like a Latin long. You send that to Google and you say, can you just check this? And you check it against Google's database and it comes back and says, yep, these are real Google places. Here's the Latin long. Here's some opening hours and some more information. Then you know you're using good data. We all know that Google Maps generally is really good information. So we're using a third-party data source, and that's where this thing really is important. These third-party data sources, places like Google Maps, are really important. In the travel industry, who's got that third-party data? I don't know. You'd probably say TripAdvisor's got the most sort of destination data, but then TripAdvisor's a lot of reviews, forums, user-generated information, which is a lot of opinion. Maybe it's good on average. Let's be honest, the LLMs have already read all of that. They already have that in their models. Who else has got this sort of layer of fact? I don't know. I think the LLMs probably have the most of it. No single company's got enough. But that's where these things are going to go. People are going to use these third-party data sources and their own data sources to come up with these great tools. That's all I got for now. Next, I'm going to talk about agents and AutoGPT. That's really exciting. That's where all this stuff is going. Agents going to take over the world. It's really exciting. It's all linked into this hallucination stuff as well, which is why I did this one first. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Next time, agents and AutoGPT.